If you're feeling resentful about something, there's a shadow that reveals itself in two ways. One is it's a pointer to your immaturity. You need to be more disciplined. You have set goals, hypothetically, and if you haven't, then you're under the sway of someone else, or you're undisciplined and unintegrated and incoherent, which is all shadow life in some sense. You're pursuing short-term impulsive goals because you haven't thought it through. You're pursuing goals that other people have established for you. You're not pursuing any goals at all because you're too nihilistic to believe that life has any purpose. All that's shadowy, let's say. But maybe you have set goals and now you're resentful about all the work that you have to do in order to acquire those goals, and maybe that manifests itself as a broad-scale critique of social structure. That's immaturity, and so you can delve into that and you can find out where you're still a spoiled child and hopefully take action to rectify that. Or you may find that you're being compelled to do something that violates your integrity, and you need to stand up for yourself and say something that you don't want to say. And then you may have to learn how to incorporate your anger into your actions so that you learn how to say no when you need to say no. And so that actually means that you're furthering your ethical pursuit as a consequence of integrating your shadow rather than deviating from it. Aggression, which can be repressed, sexuality, lust, let's say, which can be repressed. Those things are extremely useful servants when they're integrated into the whole. If you're without aggression and anger and incapable of it, that doesn't mean that you're on a good path and that anger knocks you off it. That can happen, but it's much more appropriate and sophisticated to note that the probability that you're going to pursue a higher good is magnified by your integration of all your emotional and motivational states, even the ones that can cause a tremendous amount of trouble when they're left to manifest themselves in isolation. You're way too agreeable. Well, I would say you could practice saying what you really believe, that you can take a vow to tell the truth. And that will make you much less agreeable. Agreeable people are perfectly willing to sacrifice what they know to be the case to maintain short-term social harmony. And it's not so much that they repress what they think, it's often that they don't even allow themselves to fully realize what they think. So commitment to the truth can make an agreeable person, will stop an agreeable person from being a doormat. I mean, if you're in a relationship and a person is irritating you with something they've done, you might be highly motivated not to say anything about it because you want to keep the peace. You don't want to upset them. You don't want the conflict. That's all characteristic of high agreeableness. But once you decide to tell the truth, then if you're annoyed, you don't get to hide it. You don't get to assume you're right. You don't get to grab the person by the shirt collar and say, look, I'm annoyed and you're wrong. You get to say, I'm irritated about this situation and I need to think through that irritation to find out if I have a problem or if you have a problem, or if we both have a problem, or if it's a different problem altogether. But you can't hide the fact that the problem has made itself manifest. And so if you're agreeable and you tell the truth about your emotional state, that will propel you out of that agreeableness by necessity. You know, sometimes there's a crisis and well-meaning mental health professionals rush in to discuss the trauma while it's still happening. That's a really bad idea. People are generally traumatized because something actually horrible happened. And dwelling on it in the moment just makes it worse. It's not like anybody has a solution. Here's how you should understand this. You know, someone's just shot up your kid's school. Here's how you should understand this. That'll make it all better. It's like, no, it won't. If you have old baggage, that often comes up if you're having an argument with someone, doesn't it? You know how it is. This is partly why people don't like to have a dispute within a relationship, because it's a thread and you pull on that thread and just, God. Oh, that we had another rule. Do not agree with something you don't agree with.
Ooh.
Like if we decide, you and me, that we're doing this, we don't go back and say, well, I didn't really mean it. We don't get to play revisionist with our history. So if you don't agree, fight, object, or hold your peace. Because you see what happens with couples is there's a little fight, and then one says to the other, yeah, but you did this. And then that person says, yeah, I know I did that, but then that was because you did this, and each this gets bigger until what's on the table is, why the hell should we stay together at all?
Right.
And so every fight becomes, why the hell should we stay together at all? So that's another thing you want to do, is you want to have the fight about this thing.
Not about everything.
About the past, not everything. It's like, okay, you were flirting. I think you were flirting more than you should have been. Okay, so I go away and I think, well, okay, maybe I was. Okay, well, then we have to have a discussion about why. And maybe we can solve that. But mostly what we have to do is figure out how to not have that happen again. Okay, so we're going to go see the same couple again. What is it that you want me to do? So I'm the flirtatious one, let's say. What do you want me to do? Well, you have to figure that out. It's like, no, I'm stupid. Like you. We're equally stupid. I need to know what would satisfy you. And you need to figure out what would satisfy you, so I know. And that's also extremely useful, is establish your conditions of satisfaction, make them explicit, let the other person know.
Yeah, you can't read someone's mind.
We're very bad at that. We're bad at reading our own minds, for that matter.
Yeah.
So if I have a fight with Tammy, let's say, sometimes I remember to say, okay, what do you want me to do right now? What can I do? What should I say and mean? You know, and you think, well, you shouldn't let the other person put words in your mouth. Well, fair enough. You know, I'm not asking for something false. I'm saying, I'd like to not have this happen. Can you see a way out? Is there something I could do to increase the probability that that's the route we could take? And, you know, sometimes that works. But the other person has to let you know what they would find satisfying. What your brain wants from you in relationship to a traumatic memory is indication that you're no longer vulnerable to the same problem. That's what memory is for, right? You remember something bad and you process it so that you change your interpretation or your behavior or the situation or whatever you can change so that it isn't going to happen in the future. And if you do that thoroughly, you'll generally let yourself rest.
You have the memory to protect yourself from it happening again.
Well, that's the purpose of memory in general. You make sense of your past behavior so that the good things that happen to you can be duplicated and the bad things can be avoided. It's not to make an objective record of the world. It's to make a functional map of the world that you can apply to the future. That negotiation is the eradication of the need for that pretense. It's like, you got a problem with me, let's sort it out. Because we're going to carry it with us. You want to do that? So people wonder why I engage in conflict. I hate conflict. And I find it very stressful. But conflict delayed is conflict multiplied.
Ooh, that's so true. It's worse to have lingering conflict for months, years, decades than the pain of direct conflict that can hopefully resolve and move on.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and as the conflict is delayed, the reasons multiply. And the persons who are involved, because they're avoiding demean themselves and get weaker and less confident. And so it's a vicious circle. It's better to notice. There's a line in the New Testament, Christ talks about prayer. And so you imagine that as communion with God. So you could imagine that as an attempt to confer with the ideal, or maybe to even occupy that space for a while. Well, Christ says, if you have a problem with your brother, fix that first. Go pray later. Yeah, well, that's it. That's wise. And that's a good thing, you know, if you're angry with the people who are close to you, if you're resentful. I read a lot about that in chapter 11. Resentment is so useful. It's so useful. It's so horrible. It's so toxic. It's so destructive, but it's so informative. If you're resentful, you're either being oppressed and not standing up for yourself, or you're whiny and should grow up. And both of those things are really useful to realize. And all you have to do is notice that you're resentful and want to do something about it. Okay, I'm resentful. Okay, am I immature? You know, are people picking on me, or I am immature? If people are picking on me, do I have something to say or something to do? I should do it. It's a gateway to improvement, resentment. Or you can let it, fester. You can foster it and let it devour you and take you places that no one with a clear mind would ever want to go. Hell. That's resentment, man. That's the pathway to hell. And if you don't believe in hell, you don't have any imagination. That's my sense of things.